My art is a collection or a reflection of my personality. I find joy in little things. I find joy in many things. And those things have to come together for me to feel happy. Every place has a bird, no matter which part of the world you go. To me, the essence of a place is these are good ambassadors. Now Melbourne is home, and I've got onto a thing which I love, right? So it's almost like I'm traveling everywhere in the world, sitting in my house in Melbourne now.
Hi, he's a self taught artist who blends cartography, ethnography, topography, and demographics to bring alive an entire city on a single canvas. He has an eye for analytics and detail thanks to his engineering background. Join me on the Expression podcast this week as we talk to the talented Santosh Mahale, who takes us through his journey from being a successful global operation and supply chain management professional to pursuing a hobby that began with making travel souvenirs. Here's Santosh's story of how his extensive travels across the globe and artistic bent literally mapped the path to taking up the canvas full time. Hi, Santosh. Thank you for coming to our podcast. Let's begin with where did you grow up and at what age did art come into your life?
Thanks, Neha. Firstly, for having me, I'm super thrilled to be talking to you. So art, I grew up first of all in Bangalore. So I was born in Mumbai, but for all purposes moved here when I was 5. So from the time I can remember, Bangalore was my city. So grew up in Cunningham Road, not far from where we are now, and this was 90s, late 80s, 90s Bangalore. A lot of which we'll speak in my art later, and then pretty much. Went to the north to Bits Pilani to do my engineering, and have been outside in many cities across the world. And that art journey was somehow parallel to this, right? So as a kid, of course, there was an inclination to draw, paint, would go back to Chitrakala for some summer camps, but nothing more than that. And then it was this journey of exploring places, right? So my early days of art was drawing, just it could be any object, just like a kid would do. But it's only, I think, from 2008 where this subject, what I do today, which is trying to get the essence of a place on a single canvas, sort of emerged, right? And it emerged because I was traveling, and I was always interested to explore places, and like all of us want to bring back some memories. I thought, what's best to probably capture that memory on canvas.
Yeah.
And I had joy for painting, right? So I think that was something I always did. So once the subject became clear, like for all artists, I think that's when you feel very comfortable and you don't mind putting those hours. So that's about the time I think this form, what I'm doing currently, started.
Yeah. And how would you describe your art?
So as every artist would want to say different, but I think my art is a collection or a reflection of my personality, and my personality is someone I find joy in little things. I find joy in many things, and those things have to come together for me to feel happy, right? So just to put it in context of travel, like people travel to a destination perhaps to relax on the beach, or there are others who want some immersive cultural experience. And I think I'm somewhere who likes a bit of everything. So in a trip, I would go do a little bit of bird watching, perhaps, keep one day to just relax, which my wife would not agree, but, relax as much as I can, maybe half a day at least. But, and then, there's a bit of culture, heritage, immersion. There's this local feel. And I'm very happy to go to the crowded, busy markets in every place. I think sometimes being to those markets or even supermarkets in these places tell you something about what people eat, what they buy, what are their preferences. So I find all of that interesting. And so my painting is almost like, bringing that essence of that place, and in terms of style, you could, there's a bit of a muralistic style, like because murals typically tend to be, depicting this sort of subject. There's also a bit of cartography because I love the map and orienting everyone, how the place looks. Birds, which we talked about. So it's an eclectic mix of things, but then it's almost like a problem I'm trying to solve. How do all these diverse things come together and then, and still hold together in that composition, right? So sort of a long way to explain, but that probably gives warms us up into
Yeah.
what my art is about.
I also noticed that you use a lot of vivid colors in your artwork. Was it always this way from the beginning when you started off?
Yes, interestingly, yes. I think as every artist progresses, start limiting your palette and you start bringing your signature colors. There's a story to this. So initially, I was going wide, but today the only reason those colors have a broad spectrum of palettes is because I identify a place with the color as well.
Oh,
So for
interesting.
me, Kolkata, when you talk about it, red comes first in mind. I talk about Hyderabad, shades of brown comes, and Mumbai, some pastely Art Deco kind of colors come, right? So and while I want to depict, I also then consciously limit my palette because I'm holding together a pretty complex
Yes.
thing. And I think oils allows me to do that. So I usually, it's funny, but they look very colorful and vivid, but there's just 4 or 5 hues, including white.
Okay.
And it's a mixture of that, which
Yeah.
I can achieve through oils that gives the spectrum, right? And I'm usually changing one, like the blue is changing. So, Kolkata might have a turquoise blue or a cerulean blue, and Mumbai has a cobalt blue. And that change of blue gives me the spectrum of reds, greens, and other things
Okay.
that I use.
Okay. And I also noticed that your work has a lot of has this pattern of grid, using shapes like
Correct.
triangles, octagonal. So is it on purpose?
It is a bit intentional. So, if I take a step back, right, like, and I'm an engineer, very proud engineer, and I approach art in a very cerebral form, right? And for me, like I said, I start off with I decide what I want to paint, which city I want to paint. And then for me, next is to start bringing those icons or things I want to put together. Now, color is one part to bring a harmony and coherence to that painting, and the second one is the composition itself. Because I'm not just doing a random collage or something, and these shapes and patterns that you're talking hold the painting together, right? So in my Bangalore series, I have the Chukki Rangoli patterns, and the Chukki, it's a dot Rangoli, and just like you said, the dots are joined together with straight lines to give you those geometric patterns.
Yeah.
And each painting of Bangalore has a different Chukki Rangoli. And if you ask me to paint some like Indranagar or some other suburb I've not painted, I'll still keep that, right?
Yeah.
And that then allows me to sort of hold the painting together with the colors I've chosen, right? And then accordingly, depending on the city, if there's an icon like Hyderabad, almost 10 out of 10 people will associate the place with Charminar.
Yeah.
And so in my Hyderabad painting, you would have a Charminar in a bit of a geometric shape, enough for people to recognize
Yeah.
the monument.
Yeah.
And that again holds the whole painting
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. So what is the first piece of work that you sold and how much was it for?
Interesting. Yeah. So the first piece of so I obviously it's smaller, but I think the tipping point or the what I say is a milestone would be my painting of Melbourne. It was the biggest painting I'd ever done, 1 meter by 1 meter.
Wow.
And there's
How long did you take to do that?
that was the COVID project. So
Okay.
I don't even want to embarrass myself telling the number of hours, but it was a pure joy, And the story here was, I have moved a bit around the world,
Yeah.
and in many of those places I was renting, which meant I put a constraint on myself that not only I'm painting a place in one canvas, the canvas sometimes was not bigger than about 20 or 25 inches, right? And here I was in Melbourne, finally settled. I had a house of my own, so I could, put nails and wherever I wanted. And I thought, I can go big, right? And this was suddenly now I've jumped from 20 inches to 1 meter by meter. And that was my home city, Melbourne, which I was, absolutely loved the place and how I experienced it the first 4 years. And so that was the painting that got sold. In Australian dollars, that was about 3,500 Australian dollars. So it was a big, a moment for me, but also something that allowed me to say, I need to perhaps give this a bit more attention and time than I was doing before.
Yeah. So you left Bangalore for Melbourne. How was that? And are you thinking of moving back sometime?
So I moved from Bangalore to many places before
Yeah.
landing in Melbourne. So do a quick recap. I was in Pune for a couple of years working with the Tatas. Then I went to the US. So roughly I was about 8, 9 years in the States. Did my masters and then worked mostly on the West Coast. And at that point, in between, married my Kiwi Indian wife, who always wanted to go down to the ANZ region. And we there was no good time, but then I chose to do an MBA because just to use it as a geographic jump. Did that in Spain at IE Business School in Madrid. Did a stop in Dubai for 3 years, and then I've landed in Melbourne.
Okay.
So in 2018 is when I was in Melbourne.
Okay.
And I was just telling you before, that's the longest
Yeah.
I've stayed in
Yeah.
a place, in a one single city. So in terms of now Melbourne is home, and I think I do credit Melbourne for giving me that environment to do this, because it's not easy, especially for someone like me who's having a job like a management consultant, traveling every week, and there's no time even to there's enough time to take care of your family and
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of leisure. And to think of doing this at the level I was, at least envisioning was hard. And I think the environment in Australia, in Melbourne, just allowed me, to work part time, and I could, I didn't have to hide this from anyone. I very proudly would tell people, this is how I spend my Mondays, which was my day off every week, and and found it very encouraging and just pushed me to do more. In terms of now it's my son's 9, so it's a phase where most of us are grounded, even if we want to or not. So I don't see myself sort of making any jumps, and I've got onto a thing which I love, right? So it's almost like I'm traveling everywhere in the world, sitting in my house in Melbourne now,
Yeah.
right? So Bangalore is always special, India is special. So what I'm also happy is this being in art is allowing me to come here,
Yeah.
meet people like you who I would have never met in my engineering or my consulting days, right? So I'm enjoying this, and I probably hope for more and
Yeah.
more interaction with India and Australia.
Wonderful. So, what is that one feeling that you remember when about your first commission? What is that distinctive feeling that you have?
I think
When you
so. My
read
first commission, just to put in context, I did a solo show in Melbourne called Bird's Eye Melbourne.
Yes,
So it's
I
similar to
read
Bangalore.
about it.
And that Melbourne painting I told you, that was sold. It was a piece I'd already done. But one I was most proud about was, I had painted, just like I've painted Malleshwaram in my Bangalore exhibition, I had painted 4 suburbs of Melbourne I had lived.
Yeah.
And this is just my personal story. It was COVID days, when I was experiencing some of those suburbs, and we couldn't go more than 5 kilometers. We were notorious in Melbourne for having
Yeah.
that rule. And the message was, there's so much within your 5 kilometers. You don't need to take a plane or even a bus to go anywhere. And someone looking at that commissioned their suburb, and I felt really happy, because that's probably what I
Yeah.
hope for. Like, just like I've painted Malleshwaram, and someone feels like, oh, you know what, Koramangala is worth painting as well. Can you paint it for me? And that then allows me to explore Koramangala, right? And we all know a few landmarks of Koramangala,
Yeah.
but it's only when you start walking the streets and you see, do the houses have a certain pattern here, and are there specific kinds of trees that are more common here than Malleshwaram, or those. So I enjoy that, sort of getting a little
Yeah.
deeper
Yeah.
into what are those icons or markers that help us connect to that
Yeah.
place, right?
Yeah.
And so that was my proud commission moment. It was my first commission of this suburb in Melbourne, and it's proudly hanging in a dental clinic. And my the person who commissioned is very happy that kids and everyone who are in the waiting room
Yeah.
are having something to get
Yeah.
to watch while they
Yeah.
wait.
Yeah. No, actually, like I was telling you, these paintings are such easy way of communicating to children about any place, and it's very making it very interesting for them. So, but talking about Melbourne, what surprised you most about Victoria and about how people lived there, and what is your favorite neighborhood over there?
I hope I don't get into trouble for saying favorites, but no, it's an easy one. So Melbourne was the first time I was visiting. I met my wife in Sydney, so I had been there, but I'd never been to Melbourne. I loved playing tennis. So there was, I loved Formula One when I was a kid. So this city, along with cricket, it summer was hitting me without me even visiting it, right? And I don't know, even before going there, I was like, this is, I think, my place finally.
Yeah.
But we were known as one of the most livable cities in the world till COVID's notorious rule knocked us off. But there's a reason, and I think the way I try to explain that is, like many cities in the world had the gold rush, and Victoria and Melbourne had that too.
Yes.
But one good thing is, I feel most of the money was retained back, I think, in Melbourne. And what that meant is, the buildings, which today are all heritage buildings, the roads, the parks, you know, we sort of had excessive amount of all of these for the time and place, I think. But in today's world, that excessive is just right to enjoy, right? I am still amazed. Every month or so, I discover a new park in Melbourne. I'm going biking with my son and friends, and we go to a new trail, and I'm just amazed that the generous amount of land dedicated for public spaces, for parks, for just trails, and then I've lived and experienced many cities firsthand. So I just find no comparison to that, and together with that heritage and this architecture that was left from the gold rush period. For me, an artist and just someone who loves this is just magical. Now, in terms of a suburb, South Yarra was the second suburb. I landed in a suburb called Richmond, but then I went to South Yarra. My son was about 3, and that was clearly hands down my favorite suburb. Obviously we moved out because we wanted more space and a little bit more of space to do art as well. But even now, I tell my son, like there's a very good school there, and I say like, get in there, and I wouldn't mind. I'll jump and move back to that suburb. It's a small suburb in just south of the river, inner suburb. Very charming, a lot of boutique shops, and just the vibe you get there. I think
What's it
it's
called?
magical. It's called South Yarra.
Okay.
The river that flows through
Yeah.
Melbourne is called the Yarra
Yeah,
River.
yeah.
So I think this was the suburb south of the Yarra.
Yeah. I saw your work on Melbourne Heritage Home.
Yes.
So why did that leave an impression on you?
That's a great question, and actually, a lot of I'll show you some of the designs. So, because there's so much into my paintings. Sometimes, and people tell me, each time they look, they see something new. The houses you're talking about are California bungalows. So this is the California style of architecture. Obviously, started in California, and the Australian weather. The way we have our summers, pretty hot summers. This Melbourne can get pretty chilly winters. Sort of was aligned to the California weather, and the architects thought this is a good style of. The suburb I live now today, Box Hill, has a high density of these houses, and again, it's pretty nicely laid out because the banks in those days, it was like giving mortgage. They had built these houses themselves. So when they built it, they're all not same. They all have a character. Each one is a different pastel color, and there's subtle differences in the design. But when you go to Box Hill and not just, driving through, when you start walking and then, I think 15, 20 minutes, into your walk, you'll see like what's going on here. Like you suddenly see this California bungalow style dominant, right? And as I was mentioning before, the essence of Box Hill as a suburb for me was to have a row of these California bungalows. And the painting or the poster you saw was where I extracted these from there and I put it on because there was a group near my house. They were celebrating these California bungalows and they wanted me to bring all of them and talk about it. That's another thing I love, right? So the painting is not, it doesn't end with the painting.
Yeah.
Like, in my Mumbai painting has the Art Deco buildings, and I'm like now pulling them out and having conversations about Art Deco, right? So it's I find it interesting, it's beyond the painting and there's stories within each little icon that's there.
Yeah, because that was something unique and different from your usual representation of places.
Correct.
And also is there any feature of these heritage home that remains with you and that is different?
Yeah, like heritage again, because if you talk about India, because of our colonial past, there's some similarities, right? So obviously a lot were built during the British time, and you go to Chennai or you go to the north, like we were talking about, how the architecture is all a bit like the Mughal, Indo-Saracenic architecture. But I think what's also interesting, heritage in the end is not just about these colonial buildings. It's like it could be heritage homes. So you're talking about Calcutta, the North Calcutta homes, the red, and many of them are barely standing, but that's heritage also when it's built, right? this heritage in our temples is, and like the Dakshineshwar temple architecture, I would never see that anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
So I find that interesting that that I can use that to define or bring out the essence of the place.
So, coming from mechanical engineering background, and then how did painting happen? And were your family supportive? And was it a conscious decision that you took?
Well, it's like it was a journey over time. So, when I was a mechanical engineer, I think that pretty much, like I said, I went to Tata's and I went to study in the US. I think art was never, it was not in a hobby, to be honest, then, like until that 2008, when I mentioned, when I did something as a souvenir. But I think it was a very organic journey over the last, almost 2 decades now. And, it was for my own houses. I love cooking, I love entertaining. So there'd be a lot of guests coming, and, so there were people seeing my painting, there were friends, family, and they would all connect because, again, it's the same style. I've not changed that. But I think the tipping point, as I mentioned, was during COVID. And this is only because, in my busy life, suddenly I got the time.
Okay.
I was well settled in Melbourne. I had my own home, my own studio, and I could go big. And I think, as you know, as a fellow artist, it's something you need the environment. You can't have too many things moving to do art. It's almost like, you need to have everything else stable for you to even think of doing art. And I think for me, it hit in Melbourne, where my son was like 7, 8 now, was becoming more and more independent. We finally said, this is the place. We don't want to go anywhere else. Like I said, all those little things matter because if you don't have the peace of mind that you're settled in those aspects, I don't think you can. It's hard to get into something like art, which needs so much time, and you need to give so much of yourself into that. So I think for me, along with the time I got from COVID, which meant not traveling for work and working from home and whatnot, it just sort of gave me the perfect storm, you can say, to explore and push this.
Yeah, I know we all explore different things and then finally settle down to what we enjoy doing. You mentioned about 2008 about the souvenirs. So what was this about? Would you like to talk about it?
Yeah, sure. So like this was specifically a trip to London. My brother lives there, and so I mentioned that because it was not just another tourist trip. I was there for good 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks because I could stay with him and really explored. Didn't probably travel much of England, but it was just London, and at different points, perhaps at many museums or many places, looked at what is the souvenir I want to pick. Is it like a teacup, a towel, or a magnet? I don't know what. And somewhere in that, I sort of told myself, what, I'm going to come and paint London.
Okay.
And it was my experience, right? Because London, there's so many things, and like I was saying, I was always painting a bit small. I was constrained with the size of the paintings, and so that was sort of the genesis for my style. So I came back, put London on a almost 20 by 18 canvas. I don't know how I did it, but in that painting, you would have the tube map, you would have the city map, you would have even the map of the National Gallery.
Really?
Right? And to me, those things matter because it's almost like I had spent a full day with that map, just navigating myself there. So that painting sort of is held together with all these maps on the side, and then of course little things I experienced and things that stood out. Of course, the Union Jack I've amplified in the London painting because of that souvenir thing, right? Because obviously any souvenir you pick in London, you want to, you're looking at the Union Jack that will come along. So it's sort of again bringing that connection, and so then I went to Paris and Dubai and many other places, and that's why like all my paintings, which in that 2008, 2011, I was in San Francisco in those days, all European and other cities that I traveled around. And never I painted, the place I lived because it was all about a souvenir concept, right? And then until I came to Melbourne, I started painting Melbourne. And then my solo show there got me to do a lot more of Melbourne. And then now the Bangalore exhibition has allowed me to push in, I'll have 40 paintings at my exhibition now in Chitrakala, which,
Wow.
from representing like 16, 17 cities of India.
Nice, lovely. We're going to talk about that very soon. But coming back to London, so what is a fascinating experience for you in London? Would you like to talk about anything? And what color did you represent London in?
Great. So, yeah, so as I said, London has Union Jack, so those colors dominate.
Yeah.
So it's the red and blue.
Yeah.
And I think from a, I think it's, it was my first city where I was in the States before, and, that was my overseas experience. And as we all know in States, even a place like California, San Francisco, we need a car to move around. And suddenly I was in the city where, I would just take, exchange a few pounds and, take maps and be completely independent, right from, taking the tube or the train and then whatever else I need to. And so I think that whole experience, and many people would do that as backpacking, but for me, it came a little later in life. But I think that is what stood out to me. And that's why, like I said, the whole painting has a series of different maps that I used during my travels.
I would love to see that someday. So you travel widely, right? And you chose this as your theme for your paintings. Now, it could have also been that you represent nature and a lot of other things. So, how did this evolve and how did travel influence your work?
So, as I said, when I travel, I'm looking at many things that reflect my personality. Right? So, I'm looking for nature experiences as well as man-made experiences. So I as much enjoy walking down a street that has all heritage buildings as much as I would want to take a long drive and go to a national park and see some birds and the patterns of nature. And I always mix, and then there's in between all of this is the food experiences. I want to really experience the local cuisine. I want to shop a little. Like I said, I want to go to the markets, and even if there's I love cooking, so I've got this person of eclectic taste, and not one thing makes me happy. Many things together come together make me happy, and I think that's my subject, right? So therefore, you will see, of course, like if I'm painting Ranthambore, the nature dominates to any of course there's a fort there, but the nature dominates. But if I'm going to a place like Mumbai, it's a heritage architecture that dominates over nature. So that's my it's a style I've and I enjoy doing that.
So what is the relationship between nature and man-made creations that you represent in your paintings? What is unique about this?
See, for me, I'm trying to bring the essence of the place on a canvas, right? Now, if you think of a place like Udupi, right? Now, this painting is right here. So, Udupi, there are many man-made structures. So, the famous temple, the Udupi mutts. And I also want to specifically highlight there is a beautiful museum called Hastashilpa there, which has got all these old houses, and they've just done a magical work in curating that place. Again, man-made, but well-preserved. So, to me, these are as important to the identity of Udupi as this coastal line, right? And the underlying pattern here, talking about geometric shapes here, it's a laterite stone. So the laterite stone comes in all these shades of red and yellow, very natural. And that together with the coast here would represent the natural aspect. So in Udupi, and now many people are, earlier you would see it only in fences, but now, with modern machines, I'm sure the people are using it at facades, as windowsills, and doing some great work with this stone, right? Now, you see the fish here, this is the, what they call the carne in the local language. And again, it's a very, because of all these estuaries and rivers joining, this fish thrives in this environment. It's not fished in the deep sea, right? Now, again, that's a natural factor that connects to Udupi, right? So I think,
And what's that? Oh,
this is the the Bhuta mask. So as we know, I think Kantara movie has made this famous recently. The whole region, and it's just not limited to Udupi, but the whole South Canara and then going to Kerala. This is the spirit gods that they worship, and so of course that comes into the identity. This particular bird I want to emphasize. And I'm very happy that a lot of Udupi locals have then agreed with me that this is a common bird somehow in Udupi. And
Okay.
because it's called the racket-tailed drongo.
Mhm.
So as you can see, it's got almost like two rackets
Mhm.
hanging.
Mhm.
And it's not a graceful flyer, right? Because it's got this hanging rackets or, this long extension of its tail. And, it doesn't fly gracefully and it takes some time to land from one branch to the other. And you, as humans, we can, we see them because you see what's this going on and what's this flying, right? And this bird is often, you next time you visit Udupi, just take a close look at even the electric poles and whatnot, and you'll see this bird sitting there. And to me, that's bringing another aspect of the nature from Udupi, right? Yeah. So I hope, like through this, I've shown how it's not just enough to have these buildings representing, but they all come together with the beautiful coastline of Udupi. And icons like the Kambla here or the Kol Buta Mas to bring it together, right? So I feel a city can't just preserve one thing. You just can't keep the beaches of Udupi clean and just or let the houses get disappear, right? So you wanna keep them as much as you want to protect your coastal, and then you want birds like this to thrive. Yeah. So you keep the identity of the place. Wow, lovely, lovely. Birds dominate a lot of your paintings, right? So, yes. What is it about the birds and birds of India? So, this was a journey again going back to the US, and my wife and I, newlyweds, we one of the few things we had in common was the interest for birds, right? Okay. And I think it was, we experienced it while doing a hike in the national park. And what we realized was, because of these birds, we were not counting our steps. Okay. So literally, like, when you're engrossed in something, right? Like, you're like counting how many birds did I see or how many did I photograph or, and you're not worried about, there's another 1 hour to finish this trail. Yeah. Or you consciously go a longer trail, less traveled, just because maybe there's a better chance to see a bird. And I think this happened, in that same period, right? 2010, 12, where we would go out of our way to see a bird. And many times, we've come and reflected at the airport like, oh my God, we came all the way to Puerto Rico or Costa Rica and, missed all these cities and just went to, all these national parks. But we enjoyed it, and I would come and make photo books of those places and sit and identify those birds. So it almost became like an activity, like, because birds are, every place has a bird, no matter which part of the world you go. And there's a reason a bird is endemic to a certain place. They've adapted, survival of the fittest. They have chased the other birds away. There's a story behind everything, and it's evolving as well. Like as we as humans are building or doing things, the birds are adapting in their own way, right? And so, to me, the essence of a place is these are good ambassadors. So like I said, when you go to Melbourne, you'll see all these colorful parrots in your backyard. It's not, you don't need to, they just come to you. You don't need to even look hard, right? And so it's obvious, like my Melbourne painting is going to have a lot of these parrots in there, right? And likewise in India, you go to the northeast or you go to Kerala or other extreme zones, you will see birds that are, perhaps rare in other parts, but they're common, right? So I think they are to me ambassadors of a city or a place. And so, like when I started doing this style of painting, it was very natural for me to bring birds in. And then also, as you know, my exhibitions are called Bird's Eye. And that's like, I love the bird's eye perspective. Those days when I started, the drones were not as common as today. But, we often, when you see our city from the top and when we see how our roads have been laid or how our parks are outlined, I think it gives a different perspective. Yeah. One of my question to you was, how do you perceive a bird's eye view without a drone or satellite imagery? How does it work? Well, I certainly use Google Maps, and and often nowadays, there's enough reference, because enough people have drones and whatnot too. But to me, it's like, I think when you go to a place and you give it a little thought, and you'll be like, how would this place look from the top, right? It's
Yeah.
pretty, because when you're driving, you're perhaps experiencing
Yeah.
some contour, or you're observing.
Yeah.
So I rely on, I use Google obviously to have a closer
Yeah.
look, but I think I get a sense while I'm even standing on the ground, and then using some reference, I can easily see what
Right.
this looks like. And the other interesting thing is the shapes and patterns. It's almost like unconsciously we are creating these patterns because we have built something in those days there was perhaps no drones for those
Yeah.
architects to
Yeah.
build, right? But little things like you see the Vidhan Soda layout from top, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's got a certain structure, and perhaps no one working in those offices probably sees it that way.
Yeah.
But when you see it from top, and drones are not allowed to go there, but you see the architecture of the building and you see it from top, it gives a very different perspective to the
Yeah.
building.
There are a lot of parrots that you mentioned, and birds of India. And I want to know that are there any interesting facts that you know that common people don't know about birds?
Certainly, I wouldn't say I'm any expert on birds. And in
Yeah.
fact, I've many people have asked me if I'm active birder, and it's just a matter of time. I enjoy it. I personally,
Yeah.
and I'm so happy with these new iPhones that I don't need to carry my zoom
Yeah.
cameras around to take a picture, a good enough picture even for a small photo book, right?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to blow these birds up into big posters, but I don't think I know anymore. Other than the curiosity that,
Yeah.
hey, wait a minute, I saw something different. What's happening, right? And then maybe I would come to birds of Melbourne or whichever city I'm in. I'm like, oh, okay, actually it's there here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just things like that, right? And
Okay.
like I said, when it's funny story when I went to Kenya with my wife, and we had this driver to ourselves, and he was like, he thought his job was done when he showed us the leopard, and he's like, big 5 check. And we were like, sorry mate, we've got a big 300 for you. And we've seen only 67, and we've been told that you can see 300 birds in your first trip to Kenya. So but that's how we are, right? And I think it was a common hobby, and I think and so this whole safari experience for 6 days was so interesting, because we were like 295 and 296, and it just and that's the beauty of birds. There's so
Yeah.
many species. There's always something new. You can't, even in your third, fourth trip to Kenya, perhaps
Yeah.
you'll see some
Yeah.
handful of new birds.
So, have you been to the Amazon rainforest?
No, that's the only continent I haven't.
You plan to, I'm
And
sure.
I'm sure one day I want to, as much see Chile as much as Brazil or the tropics. But yeah, no, and I'm sure I'll be overwhelmed. I mean, that'll I'll need to clear the backlog of all other places before I go there.
Absolutely. So, what does a canvas mean to you? And when you see a blank canvas, how do you plan your painting?
Yeah, so for me, because again, coming from a very engineering consulting background,
Yeah.
I'm very consciously approaching the canvas by shape,
Yeah.
right? So if I'm painting Chennai, I know it's a bit, a long canvas,
Yeah.
because, the city is by the coast, and, versus another city like Kolkata is more a square, because I'm taking,
And it's amazing how you incorporate all the elements of the city in one canvas. You don't miss out on anything, whatever I've noticed.
and I try hard. I think in some sense it's a responsibility. Like, and especially I felt overwhelmed while doing Mumbai, because oh my God, there's so much,
Yeah.
and even for me there's so much. But to answer your question, like, it's almost like 50% of the time I total time I take for a painting is devoted to the composition. And that composition has many aspects to it, right? It starts with my travel and photographing, doing research on top, on what is it, speaking to friends, and things, from local, and to get that perspective. Then, like I talked about colors, which color would define that
Yeah.
place. Then trying to get the the geographic aspect, because what's the square I want to pick, right?
Yeah.
Where it's most interesting. Like, if I take Kolkata, I want a little bit of the Hooghly, I want the Salt, the Salt Lake City, I want the Rabindra Sarovars. So I want, I'm like, okay, this is all interesting. I
Yeah.
want this square, right? And as an engineer, I'm not trying to make it a complete abstract.
Yeah.
So they are not like to scale. I wouldn't ask someone to drive using my paintings, but it's the orientation is there.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so to a local, it'll be instant. They'll identify. That's
Yeah.
that's where Hooghly is, and that's where
Yeah.
The lakes are, right? So that sort of is how I
Yeah.
already go consciously into a canvas.
Okay.
And then some of the icons come organically, right? So I talked about the fish in Kolkata, something I didn't probably plan at the
Yeah.
beginning, but I'm like, how to put it, where to put it. It's mostly a landmass, and my hugli was pretty small, and there I decided to put it in the sari pattern.
Yeah. So, what is your take about the making of Bangalore in the 90s and now, before the IT city came in? And
This is a much talked about topic, but
how do you express this? How do you express this in your art form?
see, to me, accessibility is the first
Hmm.
word that comes up, right? So now I'm in Safina Plaza. I grew up close here in Cunningham Road. To come here was a no-brainer. We were just, and this is close. But in today's Bangalore, to go, even to places we would visit just to have like a little snack, or we used to come to some restaurants here. That's no longer common, right?
Yeah.
We were in Cunningham Road a little bit on the north side, and my grandparents were in Jayanagar.
Mhm.
But it would be no brainer. We would just go for lunch and come back, and perhaps again go to Kormangala in the
Yeah.
evening. So
Yeah.
very accessible, and
Yeah.
we would take decisions. And what that meant is we experienced the city in a very different way,
Mm.
right? Perhaps we walked a little bit more. And when you walk, you would notice all these, even the nature, right? They were tree lined
Yeah.
streets, and,
Yeah.
these were all, now I've learned that many of them are not native, but we didn't know then, but we enjoyed those little aspects of nature.
Yeah.
And, even like the house sparrow, I talk a lot about it because, in the 90s, they would be so common and they'd disappear altogether.
Yeah.
So to me, but I would say, if I had to say one thing, accessible and spontaneous, you don't think twice. To me, and accessibility also means, as a kid, I remember we used to jog around the Vidhan Soda. We used to go sit with popcorn and groundnuts on the stairs. And, the kids of today's generation can't even imagine even doing anything like that, right?
No.
And so, yes, I think everything was a bit slower in our city, but that it was rich in its own way.
Mm. So, what would be the color of Bangalore then and color of Bangalore now?
Interesting. I don't know. I think that luckily the color hasn't changed much because it's still the character is there.
Yeah.
We are by heart very welcoming, accommodating people, and we have our culturally rich neighborhoods like Basangudi and Malleshwaram, which are if you want to experience that, luckily those haven't changed. So I would just say it's a bit concretized, but I would anyway not be. I'm biased more towards heritage, and
Yeah.
so I'd probably keep the same colors.
So, where and what is home to you now?
I would say home is Melbourne because it's what keeps me grounded now and allows me to do this and everything else. But the world is a canvas now for me, so I'm as much and I truly enjoy that aspect. So
Yeah.
even in and perhaps we enjoy Melbourne as well because there is if you want to eat Malaysian or even Indian or any other cuisine, it's very authentic, and it's not like a Australianized version
Yeah.
of that. And because we've got it's again a largely country based on immigrants, we get the authentic experience of
Yeah.
all those countries without leaving our city.
How do you encapsulate aerial topography, demography, language, culture, heritage, landscape, avian life, and travel in your works?
I would come back to calling it the essence of the place.
Okay.
Like everything that you mentioned
Yeah.
is like an identity, right?
Yeah.
So if someone is writing a book about, let's say Hyderabad or Cochin,
Yeah.
perhaps they would bring all these elements and try to bring the character of the book, character of the city through some personalities, through experiences.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to bring the city alive through visuals. Right.
Yeah.
And my style is not abstract that people can't figure out. I want to give enough for everyone to catch hold of something, including kids, like you mentioned, and then make your own stories, right? And there's also some. I hope you don't get everything because I didn't know everything.
Yeah.
I did some research and I try to like in my Cochin painting, I put the mangosteen fruit, and I learned only a little later. When I was there, I did notice a bit of like what's going on, and then I. When I read up on it, found out that the environment or the climate is very conducive to grow mangosteen. And suddenly you have this, one place in Kerala where, grows a disproportionate amount of mangosteen compared to
Other places.
the other places, right? So things like that, right? So you might not get that, but I hope you get curious to ask that, and then you, sort of learn a bit more.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about a little bit of your travels, like a travel diary. So why is Bangalore so special to you? I mean, I saw in your painting.
Yes. So my roots are, I speak Konkani. So though I never lived in Bangalore, my, grandparents from both sides sort of came from that region. When you say Bangalore, that's the whole coastal Canada region. But and now since I married I got married, my wife's, she grew up in Bangalore, and her parents, they've settled back from New Zealand, back in Bangalore. And so now it's become like a hub back again for us, and, as you would imagine, every trip we want a bit of quiet. As much as we want to roam the streets of Malleshwaram and do all our shopping, we want to spend then a few days or a week in the quietness that we find in
with
Bangalore.
nature.
Yes.
So how was your trip? Talk to us about your trip to Rishikesh. How did you feel there about yoga, about life there?
Yeah, so that was a special trip. It was almost like a gift for my mom. She does a lot of yoga. She's 75 plus now, and she just practices yoga, with a lot of devotion. And for me, when I got to know it's the yoga capital of the world, I had to like take her there. And it was also, for me, I've never been in the foothills of the Himalayas and seen or anywhere close to that. I think it checked a lot of those boxes, and I wanted to, experience that landscape. Which, while you're in the Himalayas, you have a lot of high peaks, but in Rishikesh, you sort of, see that horizon. That's where you see the whole thing start, and it's in layers.
Yeah.
And that whole region there, right? It's so spiritual, but at the same time, there is the adventure side of things. And then just the magic that happens in that side, right? Like with all the Ganga Aarti and so the devotion and whatnot. So it was very interesting. We happened to also stay at this this hotel, which was the top of the hill, and it gave us a good perspective of the different sides, the bird's eye view of the city. Yeah.
And what color blue have you represented River Ganges in your painting?
I see, because
Yeah.
in Rishikesh, I remember, both in Rishikesh and Haridwar, I found the water very chilly. And then it's obviously upstream of Ganges. I went there in spring, so it's all fresh snow melt. So to me, it was an icy blue, and
Nice.
it is. You see the rafting pictures.
Yeah.
It's icy. It's almost
Yeah.
grayish,
Yeah.
blue, like glacial water coming, but very clean up upstream. And so that's my Ganges.
How is Nasik different from Nagpur through your art?
So I just joked about it in a sense. I'm not
Yeah.
I've not been to both those places.
Okay.
We talked about someone wanted to commission. So talking about like, so what the biggest compliment I feel I get, or I feel when they say like, what, I'm from Nagpur or Nasik, and I wouldn't find a painting of these places anywhere. I think you're the one who will paint it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yes, I'm already thinking, I'll go to Nasik, I'll go to the wineries and try to understand why is this region, suddenly
Doing this,
conducive for wine, and then what else is there that defines Nasik, and Nagpur, another similar sized city, or and in Maharashtra, and perhaps very different coming from the proximity to Madhya Pradesh and whatnot, right? So I just joked about it. I've not been there, but I feel really happy that when people from these places say what, you should paint my city.
So tell us about Mussoorie, Coorg experiences. What did you represent about these places in your art?
So first of all, like I had two broad styles of paintings, right?
Yeah.
So I have the cityscapes, or what I call the city maps,
Yes.
and there the road network plays a big part in the overall composition, right? And this is where my big cities like Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Mumbai.
Yeah.
And then the second one is like this, the Windows to the World series, right? So this is Ranthambore, for instance, right? And I paint these places more like, the Windows to the World, because they have a dark border. Now, this is just a print replica, so it's not the actual painting, but you can imagine that, the canvas has a little like window border, and I'm
Yeah.
seeing the world outside through that. And for smaller places, I would paint in this style.
Okay.
So the two places you mentioned, Mussoorie and Coorg, are both painted in this style.
Okay.
And in both those places, to me, it was not about the road network or anything. It was just like you talk about Mussoorie. What was distinct for me was these red roofs. So suddenly you see all these and these metal sheets. Maybe it was the environment, the access to that material, the wind or temperature, whatever it was.
Climate.
People found that as the dominant architecture, right? So it was or style. So you'd have red roofs, and then they would have lace patterns, done like metal lace patterns, right?
Yeah.
And so the green and red, so that was a very common combination. So you'll have a green for the building, and then you'll have the red roof, right?
Yeah.
And so that dominates, right, from a man-made perspective. From a natural perspective, of course, the foothill of the Himalayas, and you've got every bend you take, you see a series of homes on the edge of the cliff and narrow roads. So all that's part of it, and like when you see the foothills, right? Each layer of hills comes in different colors, right? So like different shades of green and blue, and almost merging with the sky as far as you can see on a clear day.
Beautiful.
So all that's in my Mussoorie. The bird that I've put is also very uniquely. It's a magpie, which is found in the foothills, and some landmark buildings like the library and other things that just hit you. But the dominating one is that red roof, and therefore I have a whole bird's eye view of all those houses where you only see red squares and rectangles representing the roofs.
Now I want to go to Mussoorie and see
Yeah,
that.
certainly you should go. Try to go when the traffic is less and the Delhiites are not running away from the hot climate. But
and from the pollution.
Yes. And likewise, Coorg, I think to me, Coorg is almost associated with coffee, and therefore the coffee plantation dominates the painting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's such a cultural, place, right? And it's so distinct, right from the Kodava symbol, with the firearms, and the architecture style is very different. Interestingly, in Coorg, I also painted the Omkareshwar temple.
Okay.
The Shiva temple, one of the few Hindu temples built in an Islamic style. So it's again it's you go there and you start seeing these almost like a mosque. You start seeing the domes and arches, and it's a very religious site. It's pretty historic, or it's a heritage temple, and but there's little stories, and of course it's an elephant corridor, so we enjoyed going to the elephant camp there as well. So there's a bit of all that bringing together, and making Coorg different from Chikmagalur, because they're all both coffee places, but then the difference is the cultural aspect of Coorg that you'll not find in Chikmagalur.
Okay. So how do you know about these stories? Like you interact with guides or read about it, or how do you learn about it?
It's through the travel experience. Like all of us, I think when we travel, you want to know enough, right?
Yeah.
And I try to research at least a little bit about the place before I go. So then because I have this, like I mentioned, I want to cover a bit of everything. So I would say it comes organically, and there's a natural curiosity in me. I think I'm, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I wouldn't just accept something. I'll just ask and try to find out, and then through that, learn more. And I think, like I said, it's a journey through my painting as well. Like in some cases, if I have a Coorgi friend, in this case I didn't, but I would even sort of
more.
ask, and try to understand.
Nice.
But it starts from travel, and then sort of, and it doesn't finish till I've been looking at my painting, and I'm like, can I squeeze one more thing? I've just realized this is as important, and I'm like, maybe not, maybe the next.
Would you like to talk about your Ranthambore one? It looks interesting.
Sure. Like this was, staying in Pilani, one of the few trips I did was to this park, and like not many national parks in the world you'd see the tigers together with some heritage forts. It's such an iconic image, and of course it has got a history. It was the hunting lodge, and there's a reason for this, but. To me, it was my first tiger safari. I didn't see any tigers, so that's why I've put the footprints as well, but that's the only thing we saw. But Uh, but I think still, even if it's only footprints, this whole, the scenery of that fort, from the fort looking at the park, and then from the park looking at the fort,
Yeah.
the whole vegetation, and then you've got this big banyan tree, and the
Yeah.
roots growing all over
I noticed that there.
the property,
Yeah.
and this interesting bird is the Rufus tepi. It's called the toothpick of the tiger because it's brave enough. When the tiger is resting, it'll go and pick for insects or other things sitting on the tiger. And it's very common. Obviously, I think the color also nicely blends with the tiger,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's yeah. So it was a no-brainer to choose this bird as the
Very
ambassador
interesting. And
for
the tree
Ranthambore.
looks dry and
Yeah, so the vegetation is like that,
yeah.
right? So it's interesting. It's, I think, it's a very, and, perhaps it changes a little bit depending on the season you go, but
Yeah.
the whole, it's forest, but it's really like sort of a very dry,
Yeah.
scrubby
Yeah.
forest, and yeah, this is like in the middle of the lake. It's also a very popular photographed scene of that,
Yes.
like lone tree in the lake,
Yeah.
and the palace on the shore. But
I remember that from my trip too.
oh yeah, thanks, and yeah. So I think the place was something that interested me, and almost that this picture came naturally. Like I'm going to have a bit of the landscape
Yeah.
with both the nature and the fort.
Nice. Thank you. Any memorable images from the White Horse Heritage Trail?
In Victoria?
Yeah.
Oh,
What is this trail? I mean, it's very interesting. The name only. Even.
So Whitehorse is like our council. So in we have like like, so even though the broader city is Greater Melbourne, there are little
Yeah.
smaller
Yeah.
councils, and
Yeah.
the city, the suburb I live in now, Box Hill, belongs to Whitehorse.
Okay.
And interestingly, Whitehorse has a bit of history. There are some two famous Australian artists, Roberts and McCubbin. They actually used to, in those days, would come down all the way here because that's far as where the train would bring them, and then they would be able to see the hills. We have got the Dandenong ranges, so they could paint those hills or other scenes of nature in the scrubs and the bushes in what was just bushland in those days, right? So there's a bit of heritage from art. There's a bit of heritage from the structures that were built, for perhaps for trade and other reasons. And today, they've done a beautiful job in preserving that, right? I think that's another thing we can always pick. There's history everywhere, right? It's just that someone needs to give the attention and love to, make it, to bring some structure there so that the common man can experience it. So it's just a trail in Melbourne, in that city I live in, and I think because it's got the art history as well as some heritage. It's something I
Yeah. And I also read that you feel strongly about conservation of history and historic properties and.
Yes, I do, and like for example, my the Bangalore in the '90s painting deliberately has the cash pharmacy, and cash pharmacy for us in those days was just more than a building. It was like let's meet at cash pharmacy, or I'm here right now at near cash pharmacy. So wherever you are near, it was, and perhaps we all just noticed just a little board that said cash pharmacy, but until I painted it, I could see the heritage building. It was multiple layered, and there were all this the windows and carvings and whatnot, and it's all gone, right? So I do feel like of course this is just one building, and we need to progress and we need to use our spaces better, but the identity of a city is based on that. So today, even though there's a cash pharmacy, and it's not the same. It's not the same, right? So, and likewise in Malaysia, more recently, the Krishna Bhavan restaurant was taken down, and it's an Art Deco building, and something like that would be unheard of in Melbourne. You can do what you want with that building, but the facade has to be that Art Deco sort of architecture. Even if someone has the money, I don't think you can build something like that.
That's
the
true.
materials, the kind of skills that were needed, and it's not it is not an efficient form of building. You're just doing all these geometric patterns on the walls, and someone today will question it. The look versus the amount spent on some work like that. So that's why this becomes more important. that these buildings are preserved because this is how we orient ourselves, right? So if I am a long time Malaysian resident, I'm going in front of Mantri Mall, I am used to seeing this Krishna Bhavan building, and no matter, even if I didn't like the food there or I didn't go to eat there, this is my identity. And suddenly now I see some modern building or whatever it is, I'm like, okay, where am I? I'm not, not in Malaysia.
Nice. So, do you have any place that you would go back to again and again from the travels that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think like three places I really am fond of is San Francisco, Cape Town, and now Melbourne, and all these three cities. I think thing that connects them is not one thing that can define it. Like even though Cape Town has the Table Mountain, but I still think it's more than the Table Mountain, and likewise San Francisco is more than the Golden Gate Bridge, and Melbourne is the hardest because even like Sydney, we don't have the Opera House, and there's not, if 10 people will tell you 10 things is the number one thing to do in Melbourne, right? And some of it might be just drinking coffee. So it's complex, and I love that complexity.
Yeah. About your paintings, your preferred medium is acrylic oil. And why?
So a couple of reasons. So one is it's as a kid, I think you probably remember as an artist as well, like your parents would just bring you watercolors first, and they'll never, and watercolors never end unless you waste till the end. Or even if you finish one color, your parents will tell you like, oh, you're not finished all the colors, and it's almost like, I think at some point, this is I'm talking when I was maybe bit like undergrad or maybe last years of high school, I was like, what, I'm stubborn, I want oil paint straight, like that's the one that you'll never get, so let me get that first, right? And I don't know why, but and I loved probably the having paint in tubes for some reason versus bottles and pads, and so ever since, this is my medium, and it is not like consciously I knew the benefits or techniques or anything. I was a self-taught artist, and obviously, but I loved, somehow I found it organic. I like the texture. I like that you could play with, you could, get the 3D aspect in oil. And I think over time, it's almost like, that was the medium I had at home. I was someone who would not waste my paints, and I'm like, I've got to use it. And like any craft, I think when you use that particular material, you become comfortable with it. Now, as I think, about this more as a professional artist, I think oil lets me get the range of colors that acrylic, or because I can't use 50 different colors, even though the painting looks pretty vivid. I'm using 3 or 4, mostly the primaries, and then mixing it to get the range, right? So that's certainly one benefit I've reflected on. And the other one that I've learned over time is I was working, right, and I was pretty busy, and so painting was not like a set time. So the slow drying of oil was a benefit for me. So I didn't have to wash my brushes every day. I was going to tell you that it takes time. I was like, so I enjoyed it because I'm not in a rush to, do a show or. Now I face that issue. Like, wait a minute, there's a deadline and this thing is still not dry. But there are, ways which I try to avoid because I try to do, a large number of paintings in one go. So that way I can wait for one to dry and I come back to it later. But so to me, those two benefits of oil mean I'll never leave oil, I think. I just love those two aspects, the slow drying and the colors.
And how do you know your painting is done?
Well, that's a famous question, right? It's never done. It's never, until even now, I'm like looking at the gallery and I've got my paints at the back, right? And I'm like, every time I'm doing a tour, I notice something. And, so I think it only stops when you take away the painting from the artist. But in my case, perhaps less so because, I'm very consciously approaching it. Even the colors, I'm meditating on it like for a time, and then I put paint on canvas. So it's I think there's less instances where I feel like, what have I done? There are those accidents or those where I just don't like the end product or the color, but less so because I've spent some time thinking about it.
Cartography, James Rennell, Kava Marsh, Nain Singh, So, Thomas Rowe, among the more names when it comes to cartographers in pre independence India, do you have any favorites or have drawn any inspiration from their work?
Interestingly, none. I'll be embarrassingly honest to say that I don't recognize. I mean, it's again because I've not approached it like as
Yeah.
a For me, what I like about cartography or depicting, because it's interesting. The natural, the geography, like the geography of Cape Town is interesting. Two oceans meet, and that creates all the magic. On the same
Yeah.
day you can have like a cold beach and a warm beach,
Yeah.
and so it's this whole representation of the geography or map, is, I find it interesting. And as a traveler, I think looking at maps always to
Yeah.
figure out where we're going, or what's your point A to point B of an itinerary for a day.
Yeah.
I think maps
Yeah.
was something I used
Yeah.
everywhere.
And for
Uh,
travel, you need one actually to
Yeah.
get to know a place more. Any other favorite artists or artists from any period that inspires you? Expressionism, Impressionism, Romanticism, medieval art, Renaissance. Any artists that have influenced or moved you in any way?
I mean, not one single. I think again, like in terms of style, it's not impressionist or totally abstract. I'm somewhere in between. So I'm not sort of I think for me, I appreciate all kinds of art. There's medieval art where there's heritage in level of detail, which I enjoy, or I like some of the abstract ones as well, where abstract enough that you have to think through and make your own imagine, get your own perspectives and imagination going, right? So I again, I wouldn't name one or a handful of artists. I think everything I look, I see art in you know outside of paintings as well, right? Just how someone has the patterns of nature or buildings.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't name one particular artist, but I love, I could spend a day looking at Picasso or even some of the recent artists, contemporary artists. They're it's very interesting, and I think the most successful artists have found a particular style,
Yeah.
and they consistently do that style, and that's what I enjoy, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just one painting. You see 50 paintings, and
Yeah.
they're saying they're using the same language.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And what's your favorite artwork by someone else? Is there any painting that you like?
It's hard to, I don't think I've thought about it so much
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
just because as you know from my personality as well,
Yeah.
it'll be hard for me to choose one of mine itself,
Yeah.
because I so deeply connect the place and the experience to
Yeah.
the painting as much, right?
Yeah.
So, I'd probably, I wouldn't even go in that direction of naming
Sure,
one.
sure. Do you listen to music when you paint?
I do. I do.
What
And
kind?
there are two kinds of what I listen to. One is I listen to podcasts. So like what do you do? Because I think art is a very lonely profession
Yeah.
in that sense, right? So
Yeah.
I'm sitting and painting in blocks of 3-4 hours.
Okay.
And sometimes even the music you could, in that 4 hours it might be too much to
Yeah.
be listening to that genre of music or that
Yeah.
artist. And podcasts, especially the people or the topics I like, and it doesn't have to be art as well. A lot of it was art, to be honest, and I got myself educated through these podcasts. And there's, I think we are lucky now in this time. There's so many podcasts on any topic, and even there's so much you can learn. It's almost like I got a degree in art listening to some of the podcasts, and then the few particularly I like, and it's also showing you not just the technique part of art. It's
Yeah.
the art of the business,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
to make it sustainable.
Yeah.
What have successful artists done?
Correct.
And I love listening to interviews of these artists, and I realize that everyone has the same struggle. No matter how successful they might look from the
Yeah.
outside, they've all gone through the same journey,
Yeah.
and they've taken a few steps. The steps have been taken only to make it sustainable. That is the only goal, right? That they want to paint not for 1 year or 2 years, they want to paint for decades.
Yeah.
And that's what has made them successful, right?
Mhm.
So that's the first kind of thing I listen to while doing art, and the other one is music. So in case of Kolkata, I've talked about this. listen to Rabindra Sangeet.
Yeah.
And I think you naturally immerse, even though I don't understand
Absolutely.
Bengali. I can pick a few things because of the similarity with Hindi or the words that are common, but it's you've sort of. I feel like I'm immersed now again in
Yeah.
Calcutta without being in Calcutta.
Yeah. I know that music really connects to a place. Are you in a place of contentment now, or like many artists in a state of permanent interrogation and still figuring out where you need to be?
I certainly don't think it's all life is a constant journey. There's obviously so much more to learn and experience. I think, but I'm pretty content with my subject. I don't think that's going to change.
Okay.
And but the only thing is, like I said, the broader question of how to make it sustainable. How am I going to, because the art is all about that, right? Like, there's more artists and, than walls in people's houses or, people willing to buy art. So you got to find that magic or the balance of how you want to make it sustainable. I don't think I've cracked that one as yet. So that's what I want to explore. Like, how am I going to make this, I enjoy doing this and I want to do this for 10, 20, 30 years and what's my story in doing that.
An artist generally finds out who he or she is through their work of art, right? Have you?
Yeah, I think certainly. I think, it's not like I think others find out as well, right? Because, when you're telling these stories and, what interests you or how you're depicting, I think it tells more about your personality. For me, it's just sort of cemented and made me comfortable in my own personality. Like, now I'm like, very happy to say, like, this is what I enjoy doing and, this is how I experience a place. And I think I can articulate it much better now than I could do before.
Yeah.
Because I felt I found my, like calling, if you want to call, to do this work.
Yeah. Painting is definitely back in a major way. What is its purpose and mission today in a world that's bombarded with instant photos?
Yeah, so it is art has a revival, especially in a place like India, where as we start developing more, people have the time to appreciate art and also want to connect with something. I think it's just like it's handmade. It's not instantaneous. I think the emotional connect to an art is something that's priceless, right? So there's no way to tell. An artist might choose to paint, a particular scene of a certain city, or might just, maybe it's a still object that they have painted, and suddenly there's an emotional connect for someone sitting somewhere in the world, which is for that person, this is everything, right? And so that's how, of course, there is a certain minimum, the affordability or ability to hang it in some suitable place in your house or other things that come in. But I think, the main, I think the key thing coming from art is that emotional connect. And just for me to extend that, I think, it's an emotional connect to a place, right? And sometimes, like I said, our cities are evolving. A lot of people, Bangaloreans in Melbourne, have said, like, it's through, when they come to Bangalore, they don't see the Bangalore that they left. And having a painting or even a print of what I've done is like, they don't need to leave Melbourne and come to Bangalore, and they feel like, they can enjoy it. So that's again a emotional connect, but then that's a connect associated with memories of a place, right? So I think that certainly in today's world, when and that is special, and of course you got to find that person. So that's the part the artist has to do in promoting himself or herself, to that audience. But I think, and you need to be authentic, because there's someone there, connecting to that art in the same way as you connected. And the more you are authentic, you'll find that person instantly. Versus,
I agree. So, have you inspired people in Australia to visit India through your art?
I hope so. I mean, it's still early days. So, like, a lot of Australians have not seen my India series as yet, because, like I said, this Bangalore exhibition gave me a lot of opportunity to paint. But certainly, I did a couple of home shows. So it's just before the artwork were getting shipped to, I just wanted, just in case they don't come back. I hope they don't, but go back. But in case they don't come, I did call a few friends, including, a few non-Indian friends to come and see. And yes, they all, like again in my art, there is, it's not abstract. They figure out, they can see that there's, this place has, say a tiger, or this place has some cultural significance, and that's why you put a mask. I think they can see enough to sort of imagine, and then they're like, okay, this is perhaps different from what I've seen, or
Heard about
or heard about, and maybe I visit. Interestingly, yesterday was my first day at the Chitakala show, and I had like a lot of tourists from other countries who, I was so happy to hear that they had put Chitrakala in their Bangalore itinerary, and some of them were actually going on a tour of India, and Bangalore was the first stop, and they actually got to see some of the places, and they made some notes on what they should try to eat, or or experience.
What is it that about contemporary art that you're not drawn into?
When you say contemporary, you're talking more like abstract. Yeah. So I think in perhaps it's something to do with my engineering. Very rational. And from that, it's almost sometimes hard to go completely abstract. I think it's and what I've heard from many eminent artists is it's a journey even for everyone. You sort of move towards abstraction in your artistic journey. I think it's what you're comfortable with, right, in the end. But for me, like I said, I'm a storyteller through art. And a story, like a good author, would have enough description of the character and enough background context to let the reader develop their own imagination and stories, right? So for me, it's the same. I'm trying to give the observer enough through the physical form and color, and then abstract a little bit, so that I can put more, or I can let them interpret things in a different way, and make it engaging, right? Because if it's all very obvious, then that's also not very interesting, right? So that's probably, I wouldn't say I'm like I think it's just my personality and what I feel comfortable, and then I want to give the observer enough to to make those stories.
Okay. So you talk about your journey and your travels in your art. What does travel teach us about being human?
I think, I mean, it sounds cliched, but in the end, we're all humans. We have the same problems, no matter how developed or underdeveloped, or which class of society we belong to. I think we're all aspiring to be happy, content individuals. So I think it's only when you see more, you realize that you peel off the language and culture and food and all those, and we are the spirit the same. And I think I think the more you become conscious, I think you'll be a better human yourself, right? Because you're aware of all the sensitivities and the cultural influences that have shaped that place, and perhaps pick something good for your own life, or for your family, or your surroundings from those experiences.
Thank you so much, Santosh. It was amazing talking to you and learning so much about art through your eyes. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I'm very honored to be here and interact with the audience. Thanks.
Thank you.